Yo, this hot, this the spot, there it is pod.com. We're interviewing the best comedians, so tune in quick and get your ears receiving them. We talking about life and life to stream right to you, from the microphone right to your home, dude. Side note, this might get embarrassing, but no, don't sweat, yo, cause there it is.
Welcome to the There It Is podcast, a comedy podcast for comedians of any variety. I'm your host, Jason Farr. Let's do this. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast and leave a review. Follow us on Twitter at There It Is Pod and like us on Facebook. Follow me on Twitter at Jason Farr Jokes. You can like me on Facebook too. We could throw that in there. Also, be sure to check out the website, thereitispod.com, to read blogs and find out how you can support the podcast, which would be very much appreciated. You can donate one time or monthly, and it helps me to continue to do this. You'd also get your name read on an episode, and there are some other perks you can get with certain donations, so check them out in the support section on thereitispod.com. Today, I talked to Atlanta comedian Mia Jackson. No, her name is not Baby. It's Mia. Miss Jackson if you're nasty. Mia is super fun. I really enjoyed this chat. I think you will too, especially if you're a stand-up. Plenty to learn from her. She has been on Fox, TLC, Last Comic Standing, and in the Jennifer Aniston, Julia Roberts movie, Mother's Day. Yeah, we talk about that and more in this very good chat. Check it out. You're in Atlanta, but have you always done comedy in Atlanta? Is that where you started?
I actually started in Athens, Georgia. So about an hour and 15 minutes, hour and a half from Atlanta.
Uh-huh. How long have you been doing comedy?
I actually started in 2002. So,
cool.
I'd been out of college maybe like about a year and a half. And then I'd been the full year before then, I'd actually just been writing in a notebook because I had seen some interview with Chris Rock or something where he's like, hey, you're going to be a comedian, you got to write. So I'm like, I got to write. But I was too scared to get on stage. So did that. But I've only actually been full time the past 2 years. And so a lot of times when I tell people I started in 2002, they're like, oh, man, that's a long time ago, which it is. But in those first 2 years and some change, like there would be times where 6 months at a time I wouldn't get on stage, you know.
That's a good lesson to learn from Chris Rock, to write all the time.
Because I was like, that's what they do. People are writing things down.
It is funny how many people don't seem to know that comics aren't making it up on the spot in those situations. Right. And that's the thing that gets me the most. If you talk to someone about stand-up, they'll say like, so do you write your own material? Do you just use other people's material? Like, oh, do I steal material? Is that what
that comes up? Yeah, it's like, and it's in the exact same tone that you said it into. Like, let me get an idea, and you're like, are you serious?
It's so bizarre. People just think that's straight plagiarism.
Yeah.
And then if you talk about improv, then they say like, so improv, so. Do you write it? Or it's always the opposite. If you're talking about stand-up, they think that you're making it up on the spot or stealing it. And if you do improv, they think that you must have written it.
Right. Exactly. So weird. I never even thought about it like that, but that's exactly what happens.
It's so bizarre. So what got you into the scene in Atlanta?
Well, so when I started in Athens, it was a few comics who were already coming to Atlanta all the time anyway. So a couple of the guys, I would just ride down with them to Atlanta. And then I moved to Atlanta maybe about 2 years after that, 2.5 years. I was already kind of a part of the scene a little bit. But, the first couple of years, people still were like, oh, you're an Athens comic. You live in Athens. But, now I've been here long enough for people like, you're an Atlanta comic. So that's how I got involved.
When you started out, what was your process to sort of get in it? Like once you started regularly doing it, I'll say.
Well, let's see. When I first started doing stand-up, and you're asking about the writing process and all that kind of stuff.
Writing process, and then also if you can go into getting on stage, your approach there.
Okay, so when I first started, I was just excited about getting on stage, period. So there was this thing where I was like, I'm finally getting on stage. And so for those first, maybe I would say first 6 months or so, I was going up, but I was going up a lot in Athens just because there was a place where they had been running for a while. So I knew I had somewhere to get up every Saturday. I always had something to do every Saturday. And then as far as writing back then, because I felt like I had all these things in my head that had been building up for years, I would write all the time. I mean, I would be writing in notebooks. I would be in the car. I'd have envelopes, and I'd be like, because this was before smartphones really existed. So, well, no,
Right.
not really. It was before they existed. So
Right.
I'd be like, oh, let me write this note down real quick on the back of my water bill. Let me write this thing. And then I just have notebooks, just stuff with, receipts and all kind of stuff. And then I'd have my little time period where I would go, oh, I don't really feel productive, or when there wasn't as much stage time in Atlanta, I would be like, oh, I'm not going to drive to Atlanta tonight because it's so far, and that kind of thing. So that was the first few months or the first few years. I wasn't really all that structured. I mean, I was getting up, but like I said, I'd have the breaks. But then as far as writing, I'd have a lot of output, and then I was not going back and like refining or editing jokes. And I remember going to an open mic at something in Atlanta, and there was this comic who was like, you know what? He's like, you're funny. He was like, but every time I see you, you're always doing new stuff. And I was like, well, yeah, that's because I got ideas and I got stuff. I got things that people need to hear. And he was like, well, yeah, but you don't ever work on the stuff that works. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
that makes sense. And so after that, I remember going, thinking like, but that's crazy. Like, why would I keep doing the same thing? And then I'm like, you know what? Oh, that's what it means when you get a set that works. And you're like, oh, this joke works every time. Or, oh, I did this joke, so now I can add an extra point
So you can develop your set.
Theory. Yeah.
With getting up, how consistently did you get up?
Like I said, the first few months I was in it, like I said, I know it was at least once a week, and sometimes, 2-3 times a week if somebody had other little open mics, because there was always somebody trying to start one around town. But I can also remember, like I said, driving down to Atlanta, and if I met, because there were comics in Atlanta who knew that they could always get on in Athens every Saturday, I would meet them, and then as they were starting up rooms, they would go, oh, well, why don't you come to my spot, in Kennesaw on Wednesday, or why don't you go to this open mic at this spot? And so that's kind of how it was at first. And then, so I was averaging about maybe at least once or twice a week, something like that at first. And then, like I said, I have my times where I wouldn't be doing anything, but that was the first couple of years. So
yeah. How would you say you got into being a more trusted performer when you started to be able to get on shows as an opener and then as a feature?
Let's see, probably I would say, because I was kind of coasting, like I said, even in them times where I wasn't being consistent, but there were people who would put me up because they're like, well, you're really likable. So you're a likable person. We'll put you up because of, and you're funny enough. And so I would probably say maybe about 2.5, 3 years in is where I really, because I got to host pretty early, like at what was it, the Funny Farm, and it was in Roswell or Alpharetta, somewhere like that. And Marshall Childs, that owns the Laughing Skull, he was, over the Funny Farm. And so, he liked me. He was one of the people who was like, oh, you have a lot of good stage presence. And I remember him giving me a guest spot. This had to have been, I don't know, 2003 maybe. And the significance of a guest spot, like, I didn't even know what that meant at the time. I was like, oh, this guy is letting me go up this weekend on weekend shows. And I didn't even realize, like, that was a thing, And then so I got to host there pretty early in. And then, so that kind of helped me get used to the idea of going, oh, okay, well, now I know I got to, try to be consistent, and so that I can get invited to other places too. So pretty early-ish, I guess, to get hosting work like that.
Yeah. A lot of people I've heard will say like, oh, I don't like hosting, but I've heard people who are working comics say, no, you have to host.
Yeah, you have to, because you end up, I mean, and of course, I think everybody goes through that point where they're like, oh, I'm tired of hosting, I want to feature, I'm tired of featuring, I want a headline. But like for me, it was very helpful just to go, oh, okay, well, it kind of helps you learn you're an important part of the show, and you kind of set the energy up, and and I mean, not only that, you're also doing announcements, but you're kind of doing a little bit of crowd control and getting people to hush and do all these other kind of things. And so to me, I appreciated being able to get that experience pretty early.
Yeah, that ability to be able to do the business stuff of turn your cell phones off, don't talk too much. Here's some stuff that's also going on the stage later in the month. Like doing all that business stuff and then being able to transition into setting that tone to the show and getting people to start laughing. That is good ground for learning and honing your skills at being able to be a headliner.
Oh yeah. I mean, like I can remember, just, and then, different clubs do things different ways, because I had some clubs that would go, oh, we'll do the announcements up top. And then some people go, no, do it afterwards. And so then I'll be like, okay, well, let me figure out what really works. So then I'm like, hey, I come out, I'm your MC, and I might do some quick little jokes and then go, okay, well, now I know that I got them hyped up. Maybe I'll even try to make the announcements kind of funny, or maybe I'll try to do something to get people to be like, hey, I'm your quarterback of the show. You're going to keep seeing me through the whole time, because I've had shows before where there were people who don't watch stand up, or they came for the headliner. So they see, which is obviously why they came, but they come for the headliner and that's the only person they know. So they're like, who are these other people on the show? Right. And then you have to do that thing of like, hey, you're going to see me, you're going to see another person, then you're going to see the guy you paid for, so just setting people's expectations. So it kind of helps you be versatile,
Oh, yeah, certainly. What advice would you give comics starting out, or comics who've been doing it for a while but haven't gotten to that featured standpoint yet? What would you suggest they do to get there?
Oh, gosh. Look, these are questions I'm asking myself.
There's a lot of trial and error, isn't there?
Yeah. And it's different for everybody. Like it's because I know some people who, right out of the gate, got into some stuff. And then I know people who it took, 5 years, it took 10 years, for things like that to happen. And so for new people, I guess my advice would be, perform as much as you can, write as much as you can. And when you do those things, record them, and then also a big thing, and this is an adult learning principle that I learned, but like also know what kind of learner you are, because, you might be if you're a better audio person, then just, tape your set so that when you're in the car, you listen to your set. If you're better visual, then record. And it obviously is good to do all of it, because when you record, and see a visual set, you will stop little crazy things you're doing. Because when I first started, I remember my then boyfriend was like, hey, you grab your crotch a lot when you talk. And I'm like, what? And he was like, yeah, you basically are like grabbing at some invisible balls. And I'd be kind of rocking from side to side and just, doing like this. And then I kept going, it's like, I'm not doing that. And then I watched the clip and I went, oh.
Yeah.
Oh. So new comics, and I had this conversation with a friend the other day, and it comes up all the time where people say, the whole the adage or whatever, where it's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And so new people is just, hey, it's not going to happen overnight. Like it's not going to happen overnight. And even with things being different now, with people being, YouTube stars and, and Twitter comedians and things like that, or just, are known from social media, like that's still, it doesn't come out of nowhere, like somebody has to share it and it has to be decent enough, so it's like put in the work early on. And then for people who've been in it for a while, it's kind of the same thing. Like, don't let go of the work ethics that got you to where you are, because there were times with myself where I'd be like, well, I'm not going to write, or I'm not going to, what do I need to record this set for? I already know what I sound like. I already know if this joke works. And then when I actually started going to say, why don't I start doing some of the stuff I did during the early days? Then I'm going back and adding lines to jokes. And I'm like, oh, I remember when I used to do this one joke, or I don't even need to do this joke that way anymore, or I don't have to do this at all. So for, people who are trying to get to the feature point or already at that point, it's still just to keep putting in the work, and somebody's going to see it.
Yeah, you gotta keep putting in the work, not just to generate material, but then also watching yourself or listening to yourself. There's so many things that we do that we're unaware of that is such a distraction to the audience to just hear your joke.
Yeah.
I need to do it more than I do, but it's such an eye-opening experience to say, oh, I don't understand why this joke did well. I told it right. And then you watch yourself and go, oh, I was doing this weird thing.
Oh, yeah. Like, because somebody told me, they were like, yeah, sometimes you kind of smack after you say certain things. And I'm like, do I? And then and I started hearing it. And then I remember somebody telling me, what was it? Like, when I have my days where I'm not going up regularly, and then my boyfriend will come watch a show now, and he'll be like, you must ain't been on stage in a few days because you started going, and I'm like, oh, you picked that up? And he's like, yeah, because I can tell. He was like, I know you know the material, but since you weren't in a groove, you kind of got, off task a little bit. So
right,
it does help to see it. Yeah,
I feel like I'm going through this rusty phase right now where when I go up, I'm not what I usually am when I'm more honed. Going up consistently is such a crucial thing because you get rusty and.
Oh yeah, I mean and I've had to tell myself, like, even if I'm somewhere where I can't go up every night of the week, then to do something, like to go, okay, well, you recorded every set when you were going up last week, so why don't you listen to those sets that you just did, or why don't you go back into your notebook and see if something can be rewritten or something can be changed, or like go look at something that's already existing if you can't get up, because at least you'll still hear the material, even if you aren't on stage. So
you talked about great stage presence and people complimenting on it. You do have great stage presence. How do you think well, how do you feel like you have honed that over the years?
I don't know. I think this is the thing. I usually feel better about it if I have prepared well for my set. Like,
how do you mean? Like, know the jokes well?
Yeah. Like, I can, because I think for me sometimes my stage presence is better if I'm feeling good. If I'm feeling confident, if I feel solid about what I know is going to happen. Like for example, when I did Last Comic Standing last year, that was probably that's actually what got me back into my habits of going like, oh, why don't you start recording and doing this all the time? And it was that whole thing where I kept going, I have this end goal. I'm going to be on TV in front of a bunch of people. So what can I do to make sure that I'm not going to shame my family? And and so by that time I recorded pretty much every single set. I was trying to, like, even if I was on my way to go visit somewhere, I would be like, oh, okay, I know it's a comedy club in this area. Let me see if I can get on an open mic tonight, or let me see if I can do this. And I'm like, let me keep running this set. And like, so by the time the show came around, like, I just kind of felt like, all right, boom, I'm going to be able to go out here and I think it's going to come across well because I'm not in my head. So
yeah.
So for me, that kind of helps me, I guess, with stage presence when I'm like, oh, I already have a general idea of what I'm going to talk about, or I'm not going to seem so weird and off. Because I've also had times where I wasn't as confident and I'm like, oh, that's why that set went the way it was, because I almost kind of seemed like, oh, well, hey guys, and it just didn't come across well because I wasn't feeling good about what I was about to do.
Yeah, I think going up a lot for me certainly helps. One thing that has not helped me is practicing alone in my room, because I feel like I get into a certain expectation of how I'm going to be able to deliver the joke, but that is such a different setting than being on stage in front of people.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I've tried the whole because I've had people suggest that before, like, well, stand in your bathroom mirror and look at yourself while you tell the jokes. And I'm like, I've tried it. I'm like, it didn't really work for me.
It doesn't work for me either.
Yeah.
Oh, I will have some sort of idea about a thing I can throw in that'll be funny. That really is something that is fun to throw in the moment.
Right,
But when you
right.
try to recreate those moments on stage, it just doesn't go well. It feels
Right.
too rehearsed.
Yeah, because it's not organic. Yeah.
Right.
I would rather that thing came up when I was on stage,
Mm-hmm.
And then because I mean, sometimes I've had where I might be repeating something in my head to myself, or I might be listening to something. I'll go, oh, I wonder if I could say this next. But but it doesn't, it comes from me hearing it, but not from me going, hey, remember when I was walking down the street that one day? And then I'm like, this feels so weird. It's
Yeah.
weird.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, it's one of those things where the spontaneity of doing stand-up, that is something you can really only hone by doing live shows a
Yeah,
bunch.
when stand up, yeah, yeah.
Right. And it's such a weird thing to get good at. It's one thing to I can understand getting good at writing material, and I can understand getting good at delivering that written material. What's such a weird thing that you have to get good at stand up is that being good at the spontaneity. Because how
Yeah.
do you practice spontaneity?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and it just comes from being on stage where, where stuff has to happen. Yeah, because you can't manufacture, somebody dropping a plate. You
Right.
can't,
Right.
yeah, you can't manufacture some crazy person in the audience screaming at you. Because when I was in Charlotte 2 weeks ago, I wore a dress on stage, and then as soon as I walked out, this lady just started screaming, "Your legs are pretty! You got pretty legs! You got real nice legs!" And I'm like, okay, and then I'm like, all right, because that's not something I could have practiced for, to be like, well, let me think of something I could say.
Yeah.
I just said something about my legs.
No
And
one
so,
does that to you in everyday life, and if they did, you
right,
wouldn't know how to respond to it.
right. And then I finally just had to go, well, I've never been objectified by a woman, but thank you, and everybody started
Yeah.
laughing. And I'm like, and I was like, are you good? Are you okay? And then she, like, I just wanted to say that just look good, but that was one of the things where, yeah, I could have been in my house going, I wonder if somebody might make a comment about this, but you just don't know. You just never know until you're in that moment.
So you're in that moment for
Yeah.
sure. What is your process now when you write? Do you write it down in your phone and then just try to punch it up later? Or are you the type of writer who, when you have an idea, you take it on stage first?
Sometimes it's every once in a while I'll take it on stage, but for the most part, I have Evernote, the app Evernote, and I'll start typing some, like, so if if I had a conversation with someone, like I might be talking to my sister and I'm like, oh, it's kind of funny. Let me transcribe my sister's conversation, and I'll put our conversation in Evernote, and then I'll then go on stage and go, okay, well, this is just a skeleton of that idea, but let me see
Right.
what works. And then I'll go back and keep, so if it's a joke about, I don't know, we'll just say popcorn is the topic. If I'm already talking about popcorn and then I went on stage and certain things work and certain things came out, then I'll go back afterwards and go, well, what did I say? If I listen to the audio and I'm like, okay, well, now let me add an addition. Then I'll go through and clean up stuff from that point on. But mostly now it's just writing everything in Evernote. And then sometimes I'll still write in a notebook just because I like the feeling of actually just writing it out. But mostly everything is Evernote, going back and cleaning it up, listen to it, going back to Evernote, or just adding some kind of note to something.
How does it break for you? Like, how do you get the joke to break? Do you think about it and just say, well, what does this really mean? Are you breaking it down that much, or what are you doing to add to a joke?
Sometimes it's just even like I have, a couple of people that I'll run things by. One of my friends, and I don't know if you know Landry, but
Yeah, I opened for him 6 years ago, something like that, a long time
oh
ago.
wow, okay, yeah. So with him, like I might already have something written out, and I'll go, hey, this is what I got so far, or I might even hit him up and go, oh, I got this idea about, when I was driving my car the other day and how I got pulled over, and I'm like, this is kind of the idea. And then I'll go, this is what I got so far. And then he'll look at it and go, okay, well, what kind of angle are you trying to go? And he's like, do you want to say this with it or do you want to say this? And then that'll get me to think, you know, all right, do I want to, because everybody would think this way, but how do I really feel about it? And then I'll start building that way. So that's how I start trying to at least add to it and, you know, kind of break it down a little bit more to go, all right, what about this thing in real life that happened that was funny to me that what would other people relate to? And so that's how and then like I said, I'll go back and try it on stage and then come back and add to it.
Ah, okay, cool. That's a good process. Yeah, that's teaching me a lot. I was looking at, so you mentioned that you were on Last Comic Standing, but you also, I noticed this on your IMDb when I was doing research on you. You had a role in the movie Mother's Day, the Julia Roberts, Jason Sudeikis, Jennifer Aniston movie.
Yeah.
And not just as any old body, you were playing comic Mia Jackson. That's your credit.
Comic Mia Jackson, yeah.
How did that come about, and how can other people get to the stage in their career where they can play themselves in a Jennifer Aniston, Julia Roberts movie?
So there was I'd worked, you know, there was an improv in Atlanta, and so I had worked there before. I featured a few times, and then I even the last time I was there before they closed, which they're about to reopen, I think next year. I think per all the articles, but I filled in for a headliner. I had a headliner, but he was filming a movie, so I filled in. So I guess, you know, I don't know if that's where it all happened, but the guy that was booking the features, he contacted me and was like, like, do you have any material about your mother? And I'm like, he was like, yeah, they're filming some movie. He's like, there's some movie that's somebody, and I was like, oh, so all I know is that it's just some movie. He goes, well, can I give your info to the owner of the club? And I'm like, yeah, sure. So then a few days later, I get a call from this lady, and she's like, hey, we got your name, you know, from the improv, blah, blah, blah. And then she goes, yeah, it's for it's for Gary Marshall's movie. And I was like, hello?
Yeah.
I said, wait. And then she was like, you know, Gary, I was like, oh, no, I know who Gary Marshall
Right.
he is. And so she's like, well, we wanted some, you know, Mother's Day type material. She's like, but we actually found some of your clips and we like this one joke of yours. So can you just type that out and send it to us? You know, can we actually, you know, use that particular joke? And I was like, yeah. So that's it. So it was just basically, and I guess for the advice that I gave to the new comics earlier, I mean, not to sound like, oh, I'm so great and awesome, but it was like, I think it was just because I've been working and I've been consistent. And so somebody at the club thought that I was solid enough to be referred, and that's just kind of how it ended up happening. And I got to, you know, go and film my scene, and it was super cool and super fun. And they were like, do you want us to just give you a name, or do you just want to be Mia Jackson? I go, you know what? Let's go with Mia Jackson.
Smart move.
Yeah.
Smart move. Yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah.
So who was in the scene when you filmed it?
Well, by that time, now none of the people like Jennifer Aniston and Julia Roberts, you know, they were not there. But it was because the movie was kind of focused on different characters at different times throughout the movie. So one of the characters, I think his name was Zach in the movie, but it's the comic Jack Whitehall, and I think he's originally out of the UK. But he was like one of the characters that was a comic in the movie that was trying to make it. So it was like him, and then there was another female comic out of LA, and her name is Genevieve Joy. So they were in the scene, and John Lovitz, because he was the owner of the comedy club, and I'm trying to think, was anybody else? That might have been about it, but it was very cool.
John Lovitz, though.
Like Gary Marshall, like he's like, come here. He's like, let's talk about this scene, and I'm like, I'm totally being directed by Gary Marshall. Right?
That's so cool. Gary Marshall's a living legend.
Yeah. So it was great. Yeah.
That's super cool. That's really cool.
But look, even from that though, I just got recommended to do some fundraiser that's going to be in Atlanta in September. And then the lady that called me, she goes, well, actually, you know, I called the Punchline, and she goes, they recommended you. She goes, but I'd actually heard your name from several months before because my friend worked on the Mother's Day movie. And I'm like, what? Like, that's crazy. So,
Everything opens doors.
Yeah. It's very cool. It's fun. It was a fun thing to be a part of.
Yeah, that's very nice. We've come to the end of the episode, and I always like to create something with the guest. I'm thinking I could read a couple of jokes from my phone, and you can take me through the process you and Landry do. So,
All right.
or we can do something else. Is that cool?
No, let's do it. Let's do it. Because I always like to, because it almost now has become automatic to where like I don't even have to, I don't even toss it to him. I'll be like, okay, I got this idea. So this is the idea. I could go this way or I could go this way. What's the way to go? So
Cool.
All right, so let's hear it.
So here's one joke, and with this one, I'm just mentioning to see. This joke seems so familiar, but I've asked people, they don't seem to they've heard it before.
Okay.
But so you tell me if you've heard this before, and it'll just be a joke that I delete. Why do people talk about killing Hitler as a baby? If they could go back in time, why not go back and just cock block Hitler's parents?
Like I haven't. I mean, I've heard people just in general kind of raise that question, but I don't think I've heard anybody on stage say it. I'm just like the question, not the cock blocking the parents part.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but just what about we could go back? Like the concept of going back in time and doing something. I mean. That's
but I've heard. Yeah.
Yeah, but I haven't heard about the cock blocking his parents. Oh, because you know what? And because the thing about that, because if you're already saying like, listen, I've heard people say that. Everybody's talked about let's go back in time. He was like, no, let's go further back. Let's cock block his parents and then talk about, you could go in a direction of like, what would it have been like to be the dude that was Hitler's daddy's friend, when he met his mom and, and kind of going through, maybe you apply some modern day tactics to, it's like, oh, that's your wingman, or the, stuff like that where you're like, he sees the girl across from him, he's like, nah, you don't want to talk to her, man. I heard Hitler's mama, even though we know she's not his mama yet. It's just something kind of ridiculous. Like you go in that standpoint of like, what would that have been like to cock block his parents?
Yeah. How do you do it? I guess I would need a little bit more knowledge on German culture from the time period.
Right. Or even if you don't go that far, it could almost be if you find out the night we know the date that he was conceived, then we go back and say, we do something and, starve his mama all day long. So now she has a headache and they can't do it.
Oh, right. That's funny.
What I mean? Like, yeah. So there's a lot of stuff you could be like, or we, set his dad up with or the night that he was going to go, we're like, no, here's some German porn. Use this instead. Why don't you go knock this one out in the bathroom? And now Hitler's in the toilet.
Hitler doesn't happen. But then here's another one. Here's another one that I've been trying to work on that I think you can help me with, because it's one of those jokes. I am the king of having something that I think is an actual joke, and then I do it on stage and I realize it's just a statement and not an actual joke. But this is one that I've tried to use a couple times, and I've realized it's too much of a statement. People say millennials are the worst generation, that they are entitled. But millennials aren't the worst generation. I'm pretty sure the worst generation were the ones that owned slaves.
Wait, so all right. So your premise is that, okay, millennials are the worst.
Mm-hmm. That's what people say. I don't agree.
People, and you don't agree because you think
the worst are the ones that own slaves.
Did they have a name? Because I know there's baby boomers and there's
I don't know generation names before baby boomers.
Well, then you make one up. You know what I'm saying? Like you go in that direction and say, people say them, because you can say that as a statement of fact that people say that millennials are the worst. That Gen X, Gen Y. You can say all that stuff, but then you can also say, who I think is the worst generation.
The ones that own slaves.
Yeah, you can be like maybe, and like I said, maybe even make up a name where you like, like was it baby boomers? No, the ones who own slaves. Like I don't have a name for it, but slave owners is probably what that generation was called. Like something like it just gotta go like that.
Then the humor can come from just how clever of a name I give them.
Yeah, it could be that, or it could just be the like I said, if you're like, yeah, there was a generation before the baby boomers, probably a little bit before that, a little bit before that, a little bit before that, called slave owners, and they were the slave owner generation, and they were terrible because they owned slaves. It just,
I like it.
yeah,
There it
so
is.
I hope that helped.
That did help. I'm going to try that. I'm going to start trying that. Thanks so much for being on the podcast, Mia.
You're welcome.
Mia is great. That was a really fun talk. It was really just fun getting to shoot back and forth with her there. I still can't get over that she got to play herself in a movie. You've arrived when you can play yourself in a movie. John Malkovich did not arrive until being John Malkovich. Especially for her to get directed by Gary Marshall before he passed. That was something. Rest in peace, Gary Marshall. That was a good talk for you stand-ups. It had some solid advice and encouragement to keep at it, punch up your jokes, and get on stage as often as you can. Mia is living proof that it's a good method. Keep up with Mia online. Go to miajackson.com. You can find out when her upcoming shows are and see some clips. Follow her on social media. She is at Mia Comedy on Twitter, YouTube, and Instagram. Like her on Facebook at Comedian Mia Jackson. Hey, and don't forget to follow us on Twitter at ThereItIsPod and at JasonFarJokes. Like us on Facebook and go to ThereItIsPod.com for more info on the show and how you can overcome theirs. It's called supporting the podcast. If you have theirs, the only medication is more There It Is. May you all have theirs. There it is, another episode of There It Is. In next week's episode, I talked to former head writer for both Late Show with David Letterman and The Tonight Show, Joe Toplin. Such a great guest. I love that talk. Check that out next Tuesday. Until next time, be good to each other.
The music for the theme song was created by Neil Brooks. The rap was written and performed by Nick Acevedo. The logo for There It Is was created by Jeff Prater. The There It Is podcast is produced by Jason Farr.